really just want to share some thoughts today, some perspective from LPK, and really kind of with sort of my lens on thinking about cultivating customer experience breakthroughs. And as we go through this, I'll dig in a bit to what that means and what that means to me, what that means to LPK, and what I think it can mean to you, your business, your startup, your big co, your organization. What that looks like on the day, I'll give an introduction, some background on myself, and then really kind of 3 chapters to this. Take a moment just to make sense of CX, which I think it's become a little more complicated than it needs to be. So just set the foundation for any organization and even for the talk today. I'm gonna talk a little bit about like the pitfalls of parity, and really kind of encourage to sort of choose your customer over thinking about your competitors. And then we'll get into that piece about cultivating a breakthrough experience. And I'll leave some time at the end for some open-ended Q&A if needed. On my end, a bit about myself, why listen to this guy for the next 50 minutes here. I'm an experience and innovation director at LPK. LPK has its roots in branding, but has since grown and thought about the needs of our customers into the space of experience and innovation as well. How do we help kind of bridge those gaps? On my end, I grew up at a digital agency, barefoot in town, an Omnicom agency, spent a lot of time working on big, broad clients. I've been in corporate big co CX roles within the city as well. So have kind of that agency consultancy end of things, and have also spent time in a more corporate setting to know what the beats of that are like. I'll note I do come, as noted from the digital agency, have a more digital focus in my lens, and am always tinkering or building something, and often find myself enjoying other people's ideas more than even my own. So I'm helping some friends with a startup out in Seattle right now, and just doing some different things and always kind of building something or tinkering it. So any startups in the room today, I applaud you for taking more leaps in that area than I have, but do enjoy kind of the building of things. So a couple asks of the audience as we go through today. One, having something handy to take notes, jot things down. As we go through each of those sections, I'll kind of pause at the end and just ask for a couple questions to kind of self-assess on the topic, maybe capture some next steps for yourself or your company. And we can drop those in the chat and riff on those as well, but just, we'll kind of do that as a reflection point. And then again, share your questions and perspective. I'm certain there's a lot of great collective knowledge in this audience. So I don't want to lose sight of that. So chat's going to be the easiest way to share that. So drop some thoughts in there, and we'll probably be a bit more open-ended towards the end of this as well. But if there's something you want to kind of flag to kind of double click on for a moment, please bring that up in chat, or any insight you have on a specific area. So with that, want to just take a couple minutes to make sense of CX. So its space is a practitioner in this area. I will admittedly say I feel at times it's an area that needs made sense of. For me, it's so simple on the surface, right? Like customer experience, care about the customer, think about their experiences. But in practice, as a practitioner, somebody who's been part of organizations, I feel like it's become a bit complicated, and I don't think it needs to be that way. At the start of that, I think there's a bit just to talk the disciplines of it, right? So the customer's is so critical to your business that we've got entire disciplines dedicated to, thinking through the needs of the customer. So you've got the big broad end of CX design, thinking about a person's experience at a company at all the touch points. So that big macro end of it. UX design, which often is very focused on the product itself, those interactions involved with it. If you're in a marketing function, you may be thinking about marketing experience, right? Thinking about the end-to-end of how you get a customer, how you retain a customer, et cetera. And if you're a service-driven organization, you've got that end of it all as well in mind, after optimizing those interactions of a service. With that all, that creates a ton of depth in the space. But I think with that depth comes some complexity. So what I would say is those who are maybe sit outside of these types of disciplines and functions today, I hope this section helps to kind of make some sense of it to a bit more of an outsider of how you can think about it. And then if you're a practitioner, I would always encourage practitioners in this space, be thinking with empathy to the rest of your organization of how can you make this space, and how can you make caring about the customer and putting them at the center of your business easy and digestible for those you partner and work with on a day-to-day basis. So in that simplification, we'll start kind of 2 points on that. One, and this is the hardest one, I struggle with myself. You have to truly and authentically give a shit about your customer, something that's easier said than done. There is no build in second part of this slide. There is no formula for doing this. There is no framework. No empathy map is going to, to substitute your ability to really care and to really have some empathy, compassion for your customer and really want to dig in. I know for myself, I've been guilty in probably the last few years of my career of getting maybe too focused on the process of getting customer insight than actually the insight itself. And it's an area where I continue to challenge myself to really care about that customer, to really immerse, etc. And it's tough. I talk with friends who are different stage sort of startups or different businesses, on their path to IPO, or they think about acquisition, and those things can become dominant. I think things are most fun when the customer's at the center of the work we're doing. We're building a business around them. I think it keeps us dynamic and interesting. But this is an area that I think is challenging. And if nothing else, no matter the form you take, the approach you take, the takeaway today is just to really care about that customer. On the other end, I think don't overcomplicate it for your company. When you think about CX, I think about it from 3 sort of vantage point, right? Fluency, making customer first decisions, and frameworks. And what I mean by that is fluency is really your company's ability to articulate and discuss the needs of your customer. It's an area that I think is really critical. Is there just free form, free flow conversation going on about your customer? Do you have research flowing in? And in some ways, I don't even know that research needs to be formal as much as people are willing to kind of immerse in the perspective and needs of that customer. The other side of that is thinking about the frameworks, right? Your organization's ability to put the customer at the forefront of the decision, the mechanisms to do that. And what I would say in that all, I think when we think about CX and organizations, we spend a lot of time on the frameworks, right? The practice has a lot of that. If you think about journey mapping, service blueprints, et cetera. In some ways, I'd really encourage organizations to think about the left-hand side of the slide, think about that fluency end, think about just, are we talking about the customer in the way? And I think the intersection of those two things, I think when organizations are doing these things, even the simplest forms, I think you start to drive to some real customer first decisions and business on your end. So why does it matter? For me, it's foundational. I bring this up for the benefit of just this presentation, right? If we want to get to breakthrough, we've got to be thinking about setting a good foundation at our organization to be able to do that. So just even in this talk, to get to the next sort of slides in it, it's critical to kind of have this conversation. And then additionally, I do think this is the foundational cornerstone of making sure organizations do put that customer at the center and really are building a business with them. So as I mentioned, I'll pause and just throw out a few questions to kind of jot down some notes. Feel free to drop these in chats, but just asking, what is your favorite thing about your customer? Take a moment just to think about how fluent are you and your company in the needs of your customer, right? Like, do you feel like you've immersed in that space enough? And does your company have a framework or mechanism to help drive customer first decisions? And in that, I don't think those mechanisms have to be overly complex. It can be quite simple, but just curious, to think about, like, what is that mechanism at your organization that helps you put the customer at the forefront? Is it an experiment? Is it a research study? Is it a, is it a journey mapping session? But what really is that framework in which your organization leverages that into things? Right. Jump to this next section here and want to talk a bit about the pitfalls of parity. Something that I guess when I think about breakthrough, I think this is the thing that almost comes to mind before I can even, get to that topic of it all. But thinking about, like, who is your North Star at your company and that all, and framing up 3 buckets here, right? Your customer, is an industry leader, is it best in class? And this list could go on, right? It could be a board, it could be shareholders, et cetera. There's a lot of things that drive decisions on end of things, but for the point of parity, I'll stick to these 3. I think we all really want this to be true, right? We want to say our customers are North Star, right? We're operating with them at the forefront. And I think to an extent we all do, right? All businesses do on that end. It is challenging. And I think when we take those honest reflections, we could always probably improve in that area. What I've noticed and why I bring up this pitfalls of parity is I find that in the space of experience, customer experience, we spend an awful lot of time talking about an industry leader, the best in class, right? Like something out of industry, and it kind of confounds me. Like, I get why that is, but I wonder why that is, right? I wonder why we spend so much time. And I know we're in, rapidly changing times, things are always shifting. But it's interesting, and I think, I kind of point say, is it Gartner's Magic Quadrant? Is that kind of a default for like why we are so keen to like think about what a competitor is doing? The Amazon effect, for me personally, I feel like so many conversations that come around like customer experience and CX and breakthrough and those sort of like buzzwords, Amazon always gets brought up. I've spent time in industries where like Amazon was definitely starting to eat some of those industries' lunches, and you start to just try to like replicate and go after what they're doing. Technology is a technology thing. Why we kind of look that way, right? Things look a lot different today than they did a decade ago. Technology is rapidly changing. I think about entering my career a decade ago and thinking about coming up in a digital perspective, that was once felt very distinct, and now, especially in the times of COVID more than ever, feels more intertwined with everything than ever, right? Like it feels silly to even almost call myself a digital practitioner with how embedded it is in everyday life. So why we continue to point that way, I don't know, but my point with this is kind of talking the pitfalls of that. So when I think about sort of what goes awry when we really kind of hone in on those key areas, I think three things come to mind for me, the pitfalls of that. One, it's, I think, copying an approach versus capitalizing on a trend. So I think when we talk too much about sort of what a competitor's doing, what best in class is, rather than thinking about why they did that, what was the unique trend or insight that is causing this shift, we get really focused in on the approach that they take and replicating it. I'll give an example of like the Amazon Go stores, right? A frictionless experience where you can walk into a small convenience store sized grocer, and you walk in, you grab your items, you walk back out, and you've paid just by passing through with your phone, right? And that becomes really interesting. We talk about that. That's a really interesting experience. But I would encourage us to like reflect less on what they're doing in the approach and more on why they're doing it, right? Like what's that underlying thing? And I think when we get too focused on what Amazon and others are doing, we get ingrained in like what their approach is in a solution, as opposed to really getting to what's changing about our culture, what's changing about the needs of our customers, and how do we start to meet those needs. The next piece for me is you're late and your customers are going to know it, right? So if you're just kind of chasing industry leaders, best in class, what your consumers and customers are more often going to say is, oh, thank God such and such company finally does this, right? Like, and I want to avoid as a company and as a CX and as a practitioner being in the space of having my customers just be happy that we caught up, right? Like I think that's something that, I don't want them to be delighted because we're finally doing something. I want them delighted because we helped meet some need that they didn't know or they knew, and we were first to that space. And then, finally, I think this eventually becomes a threat to your business. I think, if you're always trying to just see what others are doing and copy that, you become more and more laggard in that area. And eventually this is, in my opinion, this is the crux of why why businesses ultimately go belly up, right? Like you can point to the blockbusters of the worlds and the stories there, but I think your ability to recognize what's going on, stay on top of how your customers and consumers are changing, trends in the space, et cetera, is just critical. And again, I think when you look only to what others are doing and try to copy it, you're not differentiating. You're often just trying to play catch up. You're going to have a lot of self-doubt in what you're doing, as opposed to confidently going after the area and space. So pause at that and say, as you think about your business, I would encourage you to think about the parity end of it. So maybe just start from more of a place of, what is one thing your competitors should be copying about your business, experience or otherwise, right? So rather than thinking about all the things they should duplicate, I would just encourage you to take a moment to think about, what is the thing that you do great today. If it's not, if you're struggling with that, I would encourage you to think about, like, what do we need to go after in that area? And then what is one thing your customers love about your business, right? What's that thing that you have today? And I guess in this all, I would encourage us to rather be on our heels and thinking about, like, how everybody, all these other companies are out to eat their lunch, or things are changing and they're doing it great and we've got to play catch up. I would encourage you just to reflect on your business in a way of saying, what are we doing great and how can we do other great things, and really dig in on those needs of the customer. I'm going to give that a second. I'm just going to kind of scroll through the chat here as well.
And Josh, this is Eric.
Yeah.
As you're doing that, I think it would be helpful. You're talking about, like, how, I love what you said earlier. Don't fall in love with getting the customer's insight. Fall in love with the insight that you're getting from them.
Mm-hmm.
But and maybe you're going to get to this in a little bit. But talk about some of the channels of how you do get customer feedback, and qualitative versus quantitative, or just ways that we can listen.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I wouldn't, I think we, I look at it on two ends of it, right? I think there's the insight and the customer input we can gather on the upfront, right? What do we need to go do? It is a discovery mechanism and all of that. And I think there's a lot of really great ways to do that today. I think, in our world today, we're using a lot of the D-Scouts, sort of these sort of like online sort of like focus groups, which have become really cost effective and become really imperative during the times of COVID to go after some insights from customers, et cetera. I think there's a lot to be said for getting in there and doing the research. I think the key there, though, is coming in the discovery portion with a really clear and open mind. When I operate in that discovery piece, we're often kind of champing at the bit to get to the next phase of building something, coming up with a solution. And I think we're often in a mindset of already made up our minds, and we're just trying to hear what we want to hear in that moment. So in some ways, I think doing good research is important, bringing in practitioners. But I would encourage a lot of folks just to try to immerse more in the space to get a better beat and a pulse on it all. So if there's a place your customers are going to be that is relevant, whether it is a conference or whether it is a location like that, that like kind of hits the mark, I would go spend time there just talking to people, right? I think we put up all these walls and we put up all these processes of like, well, if we're going to do this as a business, we need to really, we need to do this right and do great proper research, which is 100% correct. But I think taking some time to properly immerse is critical, right? Like a couple times a year, just be somewhere where they are, have open-ended conversations, don't have a lot of motives, just seek to like chat and listen. And I think that can go a long way to really getting to a place of, understanding customers. And then on the flip side of that, outside of the discovery, I think it's always important to get some validation from customers. And I don't think anybody needs a customer to say, go do this, go build that. But I do think you want a little bit of indication and some type of experiment or testing that points saying, yes, we're onto something here. This is something that is of interest to the space. People are intrigued here. We have some evidence to kind of support it, especially if you're going with bigger, bolder ideas. Experiment, put something in there. LPK, we preach a lot of learn in the wild. So as opposed to doing a ton of focus groups, we like to put something out in the world and see how people respond to it. And I think that's a great way to get some insight and feedback. Right. Give me, I have my cursor. Okay, there we go. All right. So getting to kind of the crux of this all, right? Cultivating customer experience breakthroughs. So I want to talk about kind of breaking this down a bit. I think about this as, pulling out these three words, right? Like the cultivation, the experience, and then the breakthrough. And I think in some ways it's easiest to start with what do I mean when I say breakthrough? And, why does that matter? So for me, that is an experience that feels as unique to your company as it does to your customer. And when I think about the opportunity for companies in the space of CX and really doing right by their customers, I think it's critical to not think about it as just a very one size fits all, like, okay, we've got their needs. It could look the same as company Y as it does for company X. I think you've got to think about it from a unique perspective. And I think you've got to do that for your own business and from your customers' end. I'll give a couple examples of where I think people do some of these breakthrough sort of things. I was fortunate in my career to get shipped around the world on clients' dimes, and that forced me to fly business class. So I had this opportunity to take Virgin Atlantic, and they had this really interesting experience out of Heathrow in London, where they have a special drop-off zone for you that takes you straight in their lounge, and they have a bar in the back of the business class part of the plane. All things that just are extremely unique. They were unique to me in that moment. You can kind of start to read behind like why they're trying to do that. They're trying to differentiate in a meaningful way. They're trying to play up their brand in a compelling manner. But these like really key moments. And why I think that's important to look at that and think about those unique experiences that, we can all sit down and we can look at our business today and we can go map out every need of the customer and we can go for this big end to end. But I think that there's a lot to say for go for these sort of breakthrough moments, very clear cut ways that show you have a lens on the customer you want to get and what their needs are, right? Which is important. Another one that I've been interested in as of late is trade coffee. So it's, coffee business today, I imagine it's quite hard to break into DTC coffee, right? There's so many regional players. There's so many people trying to bubble up in that space. It's tough. Trade is a platform online that helps you find the right coffee for your needs. So they have a quick and easy quiz, and then they connect you as a subscription service to try different local and regional roasters, which is super interesting. I think it takes an area and looks at a unique way to deliver on that, right? It's not, they didn't say, hey, let's start roasting beans. They thought about consumer needs of people who are, brewing at home, who are expanding their palates and want to try new things. And they built a solution for that. And they played into the ability to get you to local and regional coffee, providers, et cetera. So I think it feels unique to them. It feels unique to me. It hits on my needs as somebody who bought an espresso machine 6 months ago and is trying to figure out what types of beans to use in that, et cetera. So, it's fun. And I think it starts to stand out. And for me, it's a matter of, again, with this breakthrough piece and the push to that is, and the push away from parody is, I encourage to think about how to really, truly stand out and not just think about things from a table stakes perspective. The next piece for me is sort of like thinking about the types of experience and breaking those down. And how you define your startup or company may point you towards the types of experiences that you may go after and pursue. So let's say you've got a brand focus, and I think, Virgin would probably be a good example. Virgin Air is a good example of that. I would encourage you to think about moments, right? We are, again, we have this desire to think very end to end in the space of customer experience. We're trying to map that journey, think about all the touch points. I think if you're somebody who, your product isn't overly differentiated outside of your brand, right? So this is a big thing for CPGs, apparel, retail type brands, etc. Think about key moments and go and deliver something really delightful in a moment. And shy away from the notion of having to think you have to solve everything. You definitely want to make sure it's cohesive across the board, but nail a couple of really interesting and compelling moments that really delight your customer in a real captivating way. This is one for me, unique take on a mature industry. So you may be on one side of this or the other, right? You may be the incumbent, you're in a mature industry and you're trying to save off all these businesses who are trying to take a more unique and interesting spin on that space, on that business model. As somebody who spent a lot of time working in B2B, this is a lot of, I have a lot of heart for this area, so maybe you are, you could be sitting in something like insurance. You're the mature industry, and you've got upstarts who are finding new and more efficient ways to write quotes or new delivery models of that. And on either side of that, you're really focused on the delivery of, right? So that experience that is critical for a business in that space is, how do you actually deliver that product? So with the insurance example, it could be something where we deliver cost savings because of through writing an estimate through AI. Or it can be something where you're just finding more easy ways, for your customers to sign up for that service as opposed to going through a traditional agent. But ultimately, like in this space, thinking about the delivery of is a key mechanism and experience to consider. And then the last one here is sort of like a new product in emerging space. This is like bigger and bolder type things that come to market, right? It's on the cutting edge. It's when something hits that's new. So it's the onset of the ride sharing. It was the rise of Airbnb. That news. It's an emerging space. It's a new product, and really the experiences you're after there is a new normal. It's something that we don't really quite know that our experience is about to change, but it's going to fit in a different and new way, right? So it's going to get the Uber example. It's used to just have to. If you lived in Cincinnati, you're driving yourself, a big city, you're taking a cab. It was I never thought I would use a phone to kind of drive, to call my taxi and go get me where I need to go. So it's all about kind of stepping into that new space. And it can be something, this doesn't have to be quite as bold as that either. Talk with folks who are just, sometimes it's those devices that are a little bit harder to communicate what they actually do until you actually use it, right? And that experience is trying to compel people to understand that there's a better way forward, which is difficult. So it's kind of looking at that experience they have today and what they could have in the future, and making it clear and articulate for them about what that could look like. And lastly on that, just thinking about cultivating, right? So how do you get to a breakthrough experience? And, as I put this together, a big thing for me in thinking about it all was, I think that there's a ton of great books and knowledge on how to put some of this into practice, right? Like, if you're a service, you can dig deep on service blueprints, et cetera, to think about how to leverage those for your businesses. But I think when it really gets to like cultivating something unique and breakthrough, I wish I could point to a really simple process that just takes it step by step. But I think that there's some tent poles that I think are best to kind of consider in terms of where to go with that. One, it goes back to the start of this, like getting your feet foundation set and really caring about that customer. So all of this, you're not going to get to any experience that really differentiates you in the market if you don't have that foundation. You're not like, thinking customer first is your business. If you're always aimed towards like what your manager asks you to do, or what your shareholders ask you to do, or your board, or another business component, or something else, I think it's going to be hard to really break through in a meaningful way. I think that real passion for your customer is critical. Another piece for me is like, I think it's a balance of insight and trend are really key. So insight, going deep in the understanding of your customer, which is critical, I think, to really know them in and out, know their needs, know how to meet those needs. And I think a space I think we often miss in the CX end is the trend, anticipating change in the market, right? Our when we go and do that research, like I talked about earlier in discovery, we go and talk to people often, right? We go have a conversation, we dig in, we say, what is your need? And when you talk to people about those needs today, it's often the immediacy, right? It's what is happening in my day in this moment, and there's great insight there, and we need to meet those needs. But our ability to dig in a capacity to look at how things are changing in the world and understand what that means to our consumer is how I think we really get to a space of starting to break through. I think it's critical to think about what's emerging, what's looking new and different, and really have a finger on that pulse. This is a point I've made a few times. Think more like the movie Inception and less like a linear journey. As somebody who's spent a good chunk of my career creating journey maps and things of that nature, I think the linear end-to-end thinking about your customer experience is helpful in moments, but can be quite prohibitive to really getting to something interesting or compelling. So I bring up the movie Inception that I barely understand because it's a Christopher Nolan movie that gets quite deep, but ultimately it's rooting an idea in somebody's mind and getting it to stick. And I just think for me, there's a lot, we want to go and think about experience. We want to go sit in a room. We want to go map things end to end. It goes back to the notion of moments. Go nail something that so critically brings your business to life, shows something compelling, meets a need for your customer, and really bring that to life and show what that looks like, as opposed to thinking about every touch point. I would encourage us to think about a handful of touch points that we can really drill down on and get to something compelling. And then finally, I think be bold and experiment. I think part of not talking a lot of process is in this session in itself is that when we start to get too far down a path of we have a framework for everything and let's go sort this out, we play in a sandbox, right? We end up in a space where we spend more time just trying to go through the right steps, as opposed to knowing that when you're trying to really understand your customer, when you're trying to provide something breakthrough for them, it's often a space that is murky, it's messy, and I encourage everyone to be quite bold in how they approach that, try new things and experiment. And I think we're at a great time in that you can have a wild idea. You can think, you can get to this interesting event, most interesting insight, do some crazy idea, and you can go try it and test it in the market at a low cost and see how it resonates with people. And I would just encourage us all to be bold in what we kind of move forward with. I think there's a lot in this space that is all about playing it safe that I don't think is helpful. I think there's a lot to really, going and trying something new, being willing to put your company and brand out there in new ways to kind of engage your customers. So with that, as you think about that end, I do think it's helpful to think a little bit about like, what is it, that type of experience that your company most needs to kind of think about? Is it just a couple key moments along the way? Is an interesting way to deliver, or are you really operating in that new normal? I will often ask, new clients and people I'm working with, what is your most compelling customer insight, right? What is the most interesting thing about your customers? And, I'm curious to know, how much you're kind of doing with those folks in the moment, et cetera. Like, how are you capitalizing on that? And then really, what is currently your most compelling experience, right? What is that thing that is, your most breakthrough? And I'd, look at that and evaluate it and be excited about what it is, but also think about where can things go next, right? How can we really get to something that really does bring a brand, bring a company to life in its most compelling form? So those are On my end, just some my thoughts as I think about this space, and think about getting to breakthroughs. With our last sort of 15 minutes or so here, want to just open it up to some questions. Thoughts from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand, or unmute and kind of chime in, or drop something in chat.
Hey, Josh, thank you for that. This is Eric again, and I'll just break the ice and start off. I put this question in the chat, but one myth of entrepreneurship is that if you're an entrepreneur, like never give up, don't settle for no, keep fighting away. But at some point, you have to say, maybe this isn't my customer. Maybe I'm not focusing on the right customer. What would your suggestions be to rooting that out and figuring that out maybe earlier than when you get to that cliff?
Yeah. I think one, I think it's coming in with an open mind, knowing that what you start isn't always going to be where you end up. I listened to something where they talk about that concept of return on luck. Everybody's got a amount of luck that they're given as a business. Good companies capitalize on the good and weather the bad. And I think it's that open-mindedness of being willing to try and see how it resonates with other customers in the market. So always seeing where they need to kind of skate to, and then additionally, being willing to try to see it from some different angles with your current customers. I was talking a couple months ago with a company. They were doing like pet food bowls that were all germ free, right? And their big play was all around, we think this is more of a you're a pet boarding place, or like a more B2B sales, right? And I was talking to them, well, what's the harm in going and trying and see what happens when you sell to a consumer? You don't have a ton of B2B sales. You're not, there's not a lot of concern about that window falling out. And it was just encourage them in terms of what's a quick way to go test with that market on that end of things. So I would encourage folks to always be willing to just be open and honest. I think we get stuck in our own heads about a single customer. Like, this is how this would work, right? It's got to be them. But I think it's important to have the openness to kind of look and say, there's another customer. And again, I think there's a lot of great ways. It's sometimes as simple as throwing up some landing page and driving some different traffic to it and seeing what happens, right? Does somebody else give you a bigger uptick than your current customer?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you reading Doug's question?
Yeah. Doug's question, I'll read it out. This content feels super actionable in the short term, especially for building out proof points and quick wins. But how do you attack this systematically with an eye on staying power over time? That's a great question. I think there is at LPK, we do some coaching with some different clients is part of what we do. And we pull people out of an organization and they're tasked with solving a brief from the company. And it's always interesting, we pull them out and they're working in a vacuum and they're just solving problems, right? They're putting the customer at the forefront, they're digging into that, et cetera. And then as it grows and they do a couple rounds there, then we bring them back into their headquarters and we'll talk with those folks afterwards. And there's all the complexity that comes with that, right? Like, there's just different priorities. There's other initiatives that compete with it, et cetera. A lot of stuff that kind of gets in the way on that systematic end. I think, in my opinion, the long term of it all, I think autonomy in an organization is critical for meeting customer needs. When companies give, autonomy to their employees to go after and solve problems, I think they come up with great solutions. And I think they often think about it from the customer perspective. I think that, frontlines people have a great understanding of that, et cetera. So, on my end, I think systematically over time, staying on top is, I think, if your organization's growing in the fluency, so they are talking about the customers, they have good mechanisms of making decisions. And if the people working there have the autonomy to truly go after the needs of their customer, I think that's where things succeed. And that is no easy task at a big co, right? Like as somebody who's spent time in that space, easier said than done, right? We want to keep everything kind of moving in a centralized path. So not a perfect answer, but recognizing just the challenge that exists in that space. Like there is no perfect way of tackling that. Oh yeah. Tom, with the question is sort of about like the end-to-end journey and really how do you, not being bound by that, how do you get to identifying the crucial moments to invest in, conversion points, et cetera? So thanks for the question, Tom. Tom and I actually spent a bunch of time working together back at Barefoot in the day, so it's good to see him. Yeah, and I think in this end of it all, I as somebody who operates a little bit more on the science end of things, is always going to come with that type of rigor. That's how I am wired. And I know Tom is a creative director, right? I think the balance to get to those crucial moments is a great blend of art and science, right? I will be well astute at thinking about the end to end, the touch points, the moments, etc. I think it's having a team of diverse thinkers in the room to really pinpoint where something can really shine. I think there isn't a perfect method there. I think it's having a creative lens at looking at your customer and the problems to be solved. I would encourage, if you start to map it out and you're trying to say, okay, what is this 2 or 3 spots here? I don't think it's a bad thing to just, it can be almost at random, to circle a few, go explore those, go dig deep on them, run a quick experiment, see how people resonate with it, see if it clicks and connects. And if it does, maybe build on it from there. I guess it would be to say, we often want such proof and validation at the onset of any of our work that we lose sight that it's kind of a journey we're on ourselves, right? There is no perfect answer. You don't get to go do a research study and get every answer that you're going to build $1 million brand or have a big breakthrough experience, right? Like there is a bit of trial and error that exists. And I think getting to those sort of key moments is allowing yourselves to have that moment of trial and error, right? Map it out, pick a couple key points, try some things out, and be willing to kill bad ideas. There's no harm in that.
Yeah, I think the having that discipline to kill those bad ideas is underrated as a value. You have to be able to say this just isn't working. I think a lot of times in the Midwest we suffer from a little bit too much humility, and we let these ideas kind of go on and on and on, and maybe we should have pivoted or changed or just curtailed it completely.
Yeah, I like a lot of upfront research to also kind of scale up as well. I like to start scrappier. Like I want that first initial sort of stuff to be a really low cost investment when I start to dig in with customers, and when I start to like get some insight and try to experiment. If it's low cost, I don't have a whole lot of baggage on my end about whether or not whether I have to keep it or not. If I go and get management or move up the chain to get like, X dollars to go do a research study, and my response back after, a 5-figure or 6-figure budget is to say, well, we actually shouldn't do that. That's tough. So if you were scrappier out of the gates and learn, and then when you do make that investment, have a bit more of a sure bet, I think that's a great place to be. Okay, Maurice is here.
Yeah, I think distilling down, and Maurice, you can jump in, where to double click on the nice to haves versus the must haves on that customer journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is tough. This kind of gets to some of the stuff with parity. I think we're at a unique time where things have moved really quick over the last decade, and there's a lot of it's tough to look at that journey and be like, gosh, we've got some gaps that we need to go and address and fill, right? So these are some must-do items we have to go and resolve. And it's really tough I think sometimes we're trying to shoulder the load of like, we just got to get this thing through. And I've been there as a consultant. I've been there as a practitioner in a big co. I think it's a bit. I think we are, when we have a more interesting and compelling story to tell our the rest of our organization, I think we are more impactful in getting some of those things through. And I think I think when the must have is something that people can get excited about, and it's not this sort of, well, we're behind, or it's a gap. I think that's when you can get a bit more of a rallying cry in an organization to kind of help move things forward. I but would agree with Maurice in terms of like, I do think looking at those two lenses of it, like the nice to haves and the got to haves, and really thinking about the gotta have moments. I would just encourage us to think about those gotta haves as not only things that are just things we want to fix, but things that we think could be really compelling and differentiated.
Cool. What else is on people's mind? We've got an expert here and talking about this very important topic of customers. I always think that if you don't have customers, you don't have a business, right? If somebody's not paying you for things, then it's just an idea. But we need to, monetize those relationships and find out, who's really, who's our end consumer and who's paying the bills. But if not, we don't need to, yes, thanks, John. That's exactly. Revenue is non-dilutive. That's kind of the end game. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can just wrap this up. Catherine, if you could or if anybody could scroll to the top and see those links. But Catherine's going to put some links in the chat on our survey. There will be a survey coming out immediately after this session. And then probably tomorrow at this time, we will have the recording. We'll send that back out to everybody. Josh, if you're comfortable, if not, completely fine, to send out the slide deck, we can make that available. Yeah. Just send that to Absolutely. Me or Catherine, and we'll distribute that. But we'll do. Yeah, really appreciate everybody's time. Really appreciate our friends at LPK. Nice to see you all again, and look forward to continuing to work with you and really establish Greater Cincinnati as the #1 startup hub in the Midwest, one of the top innovation centers across the country. So stay tuned in for more stuff on the Centrifuge Startup Series. Follow those links in the chat for that. And any parting words, Josh?
I think I just go back to the start of it all, and it really is just truly caring about your customer. At the end of the day, I think if you use that as the North Star and you really take an authentic approach to just immersing in that, don't get too caught up in sort of the semantics of it or the processes. Just really think about that, and I think you'll get to some spaces that are really compelling.